Hello, it's me again, Markus Steilemann. The response to our global webcast on circular economy has been absolutely overwhelming. As promised, I'm now going to answer the questions that we couldn't address during our live session. And here is already the first one. The recycling of plastic waste is a very important part of the circular economy. How is Covestro doing globally? What about the Chinese market? We're looking actually in each and every country, depending on the local situation, how we can contribute. And as you mentioned, particularly China, we have there already a large collaboration going on where we take end-of-lifetime used waste from water bottles that is then being processed into laptop covers. So China is leading the way, and Covestro is also looking at many other countries how we can copy this very successful example. Covestro has said that in the value chain of recycling waste plastics, new business models are needed. Is there a good model now? I think there's many models existing already, but it is absolutely way too early to say which model will be the ones that will succeed, because currently we're not only dealing with collecting waste that has been ended up in environment, but we also need to think about how much waste has already been put into landfill that we still need to access. So currently it is very difficult to say how this will work out in the end. But some examples exist already, as I have mentioned before. We're looking into recycling old material from mattresses, but also from refrigerators. And we're also looking already into mechanical recycling, for example, with our customers for water bottles. There are different recycling routes to make use of plastics. Do you take a pragmatic approach, or does it make sense to chase after recycling quotas? I think both has to go hand in hand, and quotas is just one instrument. More important is that end consumers also understand how valuable the plastic is that they don't use anymore, and how valuable it is to give it back into the cycle so that it can be reproduced. So also in this context, collaboration between many different parties is key, and that also includes the regulators and therefore also includes politics and government. How do you guide your company? On the one side, ESG, environmental, societal, governmental goals on a mid and long term, and on the other short-term investors' expectation. I think it is a long time ago that these two things have been different goals, because investors more and more looking for all three aspects: how you manage the company on the short term, but also mid to long term. So how do you make sure you stay in business by also looking at E, S and G targets? So this is now converging, and I think we're entering into a new era where this is no longer a conflict, but goes jointly towards a more sustainable business model for all of us. How are we going to use carbon dioxide waste in PUR business? What about the suppliers? So one leading example is that we use carbon dioxide already for the production of polyether polyols, and that is then used into soft foam mattresses, just to give one example. And we're here looking also how the supplier landscape will be shaped by that, and who are the partners that in the future we will work together with. And that is still under investigation, so the process is going on. Stay tuned and be part of the process. What benefits does circular economy transformation bring to Covestro? Well, first and foremost, I think it is absolutely necessary that we move towards a circular economy. It is driven by innovation, and it will bring us new technologies, and therefore will bring us further business with our customers who are like-minded in the strive for a circular economy. And with that, I truly believe that not only there will be more sustainability to our business, but we will also gain additional business as more and more customers looking also how sustainable their suppliers are, and that is exactly where Covestro comes into play. How will you lead Covestro to overcome the pandemic? Do you think it's a good timing to increase investments in circular economy? To be very clear, it is important that we balance the short-term needs to master the crisis and at the same time do not forgo any long-term goals, because both is important and it is not a conflict. On the contrary, the corona crisis might even accelerate the current move towards a more sustainable future by making sure that now all the money that is pushed into the economy, also by different governments and states, will be directed for the right investments. So that means the investments that support a circular economy, that also look for social but also economic right development. And this balance is important to us. What solutions does the Alliance to End Plastic Waste have towards existing issues? I think it is important that the Alliance itself is not proposing solutions. The Alliance itself has a very clear strategy to look for successful approaches and projects and then make those projects large and big. Because there's so many people out there who not only suffering but have solutions how we can tackle the issues of plastic waste where it doesn't belong. And that's why the Alliance is striving to support those genius ideas and really make them large and scale them up so that they can benefit millions of people as quickly as possible. Is pursuing circular economy a competitive advantage? If yes, what is Covestro's position now? Leading or on average? Well, from our perspective, it is a competitive advantage, simply due to the fact that it makes sure that our business is more sustainable than it ever has been. Because we stop using ending resources and we will use all alternative raw materials. We will also go for renewable energy. And that makes us, from the eyes of our customers, the partner of choice in a sustainable material world. And that's why I believe competitive advantage will arise from that. As of today, I would say that Covestro is definitely one of the leading companies in this field. And we make sure that we stay at this position. What progress have you made already with circular procurement as key function for your company? How do you include your suppliers in that development? We have frequently global meetings with our suppliers. So we invite them to us, we let them be part of our strategy, and also we see how we can jointly collaborate towards a more sustainable future. And that's what we call Together for Sustainability in our entire suppliers community. And here's many different aspects that we have to look for, and therefore we really tap into the massive resources that our suppliers as well have to come up with great ideas. So this concept of collaborating is in this field more important than in many other fields. But here I think Covestro and its partners on the supply side are on a very good path forward. How can my country, Nigeria, collaborate with you to achieve all this beautiful circular economy? Because we have plastics pollution here in Nigeria. I think most important is that you identify what you can do in your local communities and then, for example, turn to the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Because again, here the topics are sometimes very local and many of the ideas work on a local basis, but you can also share your ideas with other local communities across the world and see whether they already had similar challenges and what solutions they have brought to the table. So please contact us and I'm happy to refer you, for example, to the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. How does Covestro plan to bring other companies, consumers, government, stakeholders to embrace circular economy, build a movement? Well, I think we have done so in the already in the past. And what you can see is that we're making very fast progress. In this context, today is also a very special day for us because we are going public. And the response in the social media will also further create reach so that more and more companies and other partners in the value chain realize how serious we are about it and how committed we are. And that will create further momentum and also maybe in one day create a movement. And that's what we continue to do. What is the role of the chemical industry in waste management? I think one thing is important. Waste has to be treated in many different ways. And today we are not treating a lot of waste in the right way. But as chemistry can actually change, let's say, what we have from one material to another, I think chemistry has a very essential play in the future, because we are the ones who transform things from one material into the other, and that also applies to waste. So we must, out of waste, value products again, and here the chemistry of the entire industry kicks in. The technology to convert carbon back to raw material is very innovative. How would this change the current economy and fossil fuel dependent industries? It is difficult to foresee how exactly that will change. But think about it, it is not that hard. We just learned about 150, maybe 200 years ago to build from the scratch an entirely oil and coal-based industry, and now we just do the same thing again. It is maybe unimaginable from today's perspective, but how do you think people felt 150 or 200 years ago when there were just very, very few oil sources and when just a few people started to using oil, and then over the next 200 years all this movement and change actually has happened. And I believe the same thing can also happen today, so that we move away from oil into the next age of non-fossil fueled raw materials. Which digital technologies can prove to be vital for circular economy? I think one field beyond artificial intelligence is computational chemistry. Because computational chemistry combines the best of many different worlds, the creativity and the knowledge of chemists and supercomputing power. And this jointly leads us much faster to very unexpected results, or gives us first time ever insights that we could never gain. And with that, we will be much faster in providing the right solutions that we also need for circular economy. So computational chemistry, for me, is one of the key new technologies. What is the energy consumption for the manufacturing of plastic compared to other materials? That is a very difficult question, because to really take from cradle to cradle all things into consideration, it looks as if plastics is one of the lower energy consuming materials compared to many other materials that are used as alternatives. But here's a lot of studies going on, and I think the race is still on who comes with the best concept, so that we finally can compare and objectively can compare different materials. One of the challenges, so Sun Haiyan is asking, one of the challenges for circular economy is the complicated elements in one material. What is the solution for this? One of the solutions can and will be chemical recycling, because the materials are as they are because they have defined properties, and consumers are really appreciating those particular properties. And from that perspective, how we compose the materials defines the properties, and then we have to see how in the end of the day we find the right methodology to break up those molecules and those components, so that we can reuse them and make fully and complete fresh material out of it again. And here chemical recycling will play a key role. How is Covestro taking action to help promote alternative raw materials, for example carbon dioxide? What is the biggest challenge? I think what we're doing today and what we're doing just right now here is exactly promoting this idea. And I think the biggest challenge is to let people feel and let people imagine that this is possible. Because we come from a fossil fuel-based economy and age. And we have to now learn that there is different ways how you can run this, and that this will all be driven through innovative and new technologies. And that is hard to imagine. If you don't have them at hand, how will it work? But to create this imagine and spark, let's say, this spirit of innovation is exactly why we're here, and that's currently the biggest challenge. Why is Covestro promoting plastics instead of bioplastics? What change will it bring to the society? Important is that bioplastics are normally based on renewable raw materials. And that means they have already solved one piece of the puzzle. But in general terms, no matter whether plastics or bioplastics, important is that at the end of a useful lifetime, all of those materials come back. And they need to come back into the circle, so that in the end of the day, all plastics are based on renewable sources, no matter whether it's bioplastics, based on old material, or based on carbon dioxide. That's the key. Why or why not, and how would you collaborate with competitors to advance the industry? I think it is very important that collaboration is a legally very clearly defined term, and we must make sure that we always follow the respective legislation and laws in this context. Nonetheless, collaboration, also amongst competitors, wherever possible and wherever legally allowed, is of absolute key, so that we actually jointly develop technologies, that we also jointly drive the entire value circle towards a circular economy. And that is what we, for example, have done in the context of the World Economic Forum, but what we also do through the respective industry associations and alliances, for example, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Does the government support your initiatives? That is a very difficult question, because there is hundreds of small projects and larger projects which are partially publicly funded, and that is a very important step. Nonetheless, the majority of what we are doing today is just driven by the industry and just driven by the respective companies. So from that perspective, there is room for improvement in the future. Do you consider that sufficient capital investment is happening to make circular economy mainstream? That is very difficult to answer right now, because what is the definition of sufficient? Currently, we have a lot of investments in place, and those investments also can be used and will be used even after we have fully introduced a circular economy. And then there will be new investments. And therefore, I think a lot of this is already going on. And if we now not look at the pure amount of money and the pure amount of investments, but looking into that we swiftly implement them and change the economic model towards circularity, that is even more important. So in that context, I'm quite optimistic that what is currently there is the right amount, so let's do it right now. How long will it take to bring this concept into action? I made it very clear, it is a matter of decades. So this will not happen next year, in 2 years, in 5 years. Important is that we now look, where do we want to be in 15 or 20 years from now? And if we want to be there, what decisions are we taking? For example, in the context of what is part of our research and development portfolio. Which capabilities are we looking for when we are hiring people? With which partners are we collaborating? And where do we have to redirect the money in terms of our capital investments? And these are the questions that are guiding us today, because we know where we want to be. And then it is the question, how quickly can we realize that? But that question is currently too difficult to exactly be answered. Do you consider the COVID-19 pandemic rather as a chance for sustainability and circular economy, or is it slowing down developments? I'm an optimist by nature, so for sure I think that the current crisis also can be positive momentum for a circular economy, because now massive investments coming from states and governments into the economy to rebuild it. And important in this context is that we're not only looking into ecological aspects, but that we're also looking into social aspects and economical aspects. So this must be balanced, so that short term the economy is coming very quickly back, and that mid and long term we also strive for the ecology as well as for social justice in that context. Which type of chemical recycling is most promising? I would say the race is still on. There is different chemical recycling solutions currently available, and it is for me too early to judge which one will be the most, or the one that will be used most. In this context, it is once again important that we keep our eyes and everything open for different types of technology, as it cannot simply be judged which one will the one that will succeed and provide most of the solutions. In the end, I believe there will be many different types of chemical recycling next to each other, depending on what problem we try to solve. What kind of support are you, as a plastics industry, looking for from governments and NGOs to make the Alliance to End Plastic Waste a successful initiative? Join forces, bring yourself to the table, address the topics that are important to you, but also come to the table with 2 open ears. Because today we focus a lot on plastics as one of the public enemies #1 from a perception of some groups. Nonetheless, plastics are the solution for a more sustainable future. And that's what we have to jointly tackle. So that's why it is important that we jointly sit at the table and making sure we're driving towards one direction. How do you plan to strike a balance between the utilization of plastics and the rising alarms promoting aversion from plastics? It is very important to really look at the advantages that plastics bring to the table and also look at where did we not manage our waste appropriately. Because the issue is not about plastics in itself, it is the underlying issue of mankind and societies not managing their waste appropriately. So that's what we have to tackle to really promote the true circular and sustainable character of plastics as a material for the future. What would be the role of circular economy post-COVID-19? Regardless of the current crisis, Covestro worked already for quite some time on the concept of a circular economy. And I believe that this is exactly the right way forward. And it does not matter how we get out of this crisis and how the world will look like after or with this crisis. Important is that we as humans learn to stop thinking linear and start thinking in circles. And that is what the circular economy for a more sustainable world really brings to the table. Does COVID-19 provide a chance to increase acceptance for higher prices alongside the value chain till the end consumer to an environmental improvement? I think it is important that these two things are not necessarily related. So an environmental positive behavior of consumers is less about prices for specific goods. It is also about how consumers look at end-of-life cycle treatment of the things that were very useful for them for quite some time. And here it doesn't matter whether we talk about single-use packaging or whether we talk about long-term in-use goods like refrigerators or insulation of buildings. Important is that we understand, and also the consumer understands, hey, I have a valuable raw material, and if I put it in the right place, somebody will process it and make new material out of it. So the consumer has a very vital role also in terms of his behavior or her behavior to drive a circular economy. Which role do you expect mass balancing and respective certificates to play for marketing of products derived from bio or alternative, that means non-fossil feedstock? I think a reliable system of mass balance, or let's call them certificate, is absolutely important. And here it is even more important to not focus on, for example, bio-based things as such. Even more important is that everything that comes back at the end of its life cycle and is reused gets a positive connotation in this context. That could be bio-based, but that could also be material that has been derived from waste streams or material that, for example, has been derived from carbon dioxide. So here we must also be open to the approach and not trying to narrow down to one single source, for example, for raw materials. What are some of the common cosmetic differences between virgin and bio-based or recycled plastics? I'm not sure what the reference of cosmetic difference really is referring to, but let's assume you're looking for the properties of the material or you're looking for the optics of the material. There is basically no difference. It always depends what type of material you're talking about, no matter whether it's bio-based or fossil fuel-based. It is designed with a structure for a specific purpose, and here it doesn't matter where it originally came from. And that is also the positive side, because it means if you get the structure right, based on whatever source you have, then the properties will be exactly as the consumers are expecting it. And then end of lifetime, you have to make sure that this all is reused in the entire cycle once again and again and again. Once all greenhouse gas emissions are measured accurately, who on the market will determine the rules the value/price of products along the whole product life cycle. Well, according to the current business model, the market will rule the price. And that is also a matter of how large the acceptance for such products is, but also how large consumers really value that they have products that have been run in full circulars. And here we have to find ways, here competition have to kick in, and here innovation and new technologies have to kick in to make sure that we solve all these issues. And there will be no central intelligence which in the end of the day will determine a price. It is all about a free market, it's all about competition, and here Covestro feels very well positioned. What is Covestro's timeline for the shift to sustainable products? We have already started with a small amount of our product portfolio to drive for more sustainability. We're not perfect yet, by far. We still heavily rely as a plastics producer on oil and other non-renewable resources. And that is exactly what we try to change. So first and foremost, we need to demonstrate that things in principle work. And that's what we're doing day by day in our research and development departments. Then we have to invest. Then we have to bring the products to the market. And finally, we hope that we can shift the entire product portfolio to be more sustainable than today. But that is a journey that will take us in the range of decades and will not be finished in a few years. What are your second lifetime solutions and ideas for PUR applications which are applied in construction and windmills after their end of life? Here the key topic of chemical recycling kick in. It is already today in the laboratory possible that you decompose these polyurethane materials, no matter whether it's soft foams or rigid foams, into its original building blocks, so-called molecules, and then to reuse those molecules once again to go for fresh, new polyurethane material. And that is exactly why I believe that also polyurethanes via chemical recycling can become fully circular. Will circular economy become a concept for the richer and developed economies only? What about targeting developing economies such as India? I think circular economy will fail if it excludes parts of the world or a majority of people. And that's why it is so important that this is not a concept for richer or more developed countries. No, it must be the opposite. It must be a concept particularly for developing economies. And in that context, I truly believe that also here the Alliance to End Plastic Waste has a major role to play, as many of the topics that we're seeing in this context happening in developing countries. How are the emerging economy countries responding to your vision of a circular economy? I think it is currently simply too early to judge. We just have launched the campaign today, but we see from different other activities, anecdotally, that it is highly welcomed. Because the larger issues which we currently have, where a circular economy approach is desperately needed, still arise in developing economies. And that's why I believe overall people will be predominantly positive also about this approach. How can biotechnology help in this context, and what is Covestro doing in this field beside the bioaniline project? While I cannot open the magical box here and tell you what we're exactly working on research and development laboratories, but for us it is absolutely crucial that also enzymatic processes, and in that context bioscience, plays a major role to get access to the right molecules that come, for example, from biomass. But there has also been very successful example how a chemical decomposition, for example, of plastics is supported by bacteria. This is also a very promising way, and I think therefore a lot of work to be done for Covestro and its partners. You mentioned an example of producing laptop covers from plastic bottles. Wouldn't it make sense to produce only long-life products with a circular economy? If you look into what we have to tackle, first and foremost, the first question is always, do I need any type of packaging, for example, at all? And packaging, this word alone goes way beyond what you know from food packaging. Also a computer laptop is packed in an outer shell, also a refrigerator is packed in an outer shell of highly insulating materials. So long story short, this is not about the lifetime of an individual product. It is more about, does the package in itself add more value to the current use time of the product, for example, by making food more durable or not. And once you have decided on that, then look for the right material, and I truly believe plastics in many occasions is still the best material. When we look into the oceans and see the consumers litter, how do you think we can drive the change toward recycling? That is maybe one of the still unsolved issues. We have to make sure that people understand whatever they do and however they change their personal behavior is absolutely crucial and key to really drive a circular economy forward. And that's why we have to reach out to end consumers to make them understand, to make them feel and make them experience how valuable their contribution is, and therefore how valuable the leftovers or the no longer in use items are that they have. And that goes way beyond plastics. Once again, the plastic in the ocean is just the messenger. The underlying issue here is that we do not appropriately manage our waste. What is the aspiration of Covestro with the circular economy contribution to the Earth and the world economy? I think we have made it very clear. The circular economy for us, for Covestro, is the way forward how we want to drive the chemical industry, but the entire value chain, to a more sustainable business model. And that will benefit the world, and that will benefit the planet, and that will benefit the people. And in the end, it will also benefit the economy. So we are coming to an end now. There is still a couple of very specialized questions that need more elaborated answers. We will give them in written form. It was a great and important experience for me to hear all your questions and learn what are the topics that moves you. I hope our input has been helpful to you. Thank you very much for your engagement and participation. And I strongly hope we will manage to realize the circular economy together. In that sense, goodbye and take care.